welcome to the Preemie Chats, and thank you everyone for joining us here live on our YouTube channel or Facebook page. I'm Fabiana Bacchini, Executive Director of the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation. CPBF is a charitable organization, and our mission is to support and educate families of premature babies. This Preemie Chat series is one of the many initiatives we have to bring information for NICU families and healthcare professionals. Here every Friday, we talk with experts, researchers, and parents who share with us their experience and knowledge. Also on our website, canadianpreemies.org, parents will find all kinds of resources and support. And today we're going to talk about RSV and protecting your baby. This coming winter, Canada might see an increase in the Rsv virus. Get an early start to understanding why and how to keep your baby as protected as possible. Our guests today will share strategies to decrease the risk and highlight ideas to have fun with your baby. I have here joining me live from Toronto, Maureen Riley, who is a retired NICU nurse and past Rsv program coordinator at Mount Sinai Hospital in Toronto. She was also a parent resource nurse that we're going to talk about their role. And she's currently the chair of the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation Education Committee. Maureen, welcome. Thank you for joining us here today.
Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be here to be able to share a little information. This is fantastic. Thank you, Fabiana, asking me.
And I also have here joining us live from Toronto, Maureen Riley, who is an ICU mom and longtime member of the Mount Sinai Perinatal Parents Association. Her son Sullivan was born in November 1998, weighing only 600 grams at 27 weeks. His twin Griffin was stillborn. This was her fourth pregnancy and first live birth. Sullivan was in the ICU for 124 days. He developed necrotizing enterocolitis at 3 weeks of age and RSV at approximately 2 months. Maureen will share her family's experience with RSV. She hopes to both prepare and reassure parents that they have the power to protect and safeguard their babies, all while enjoying finally having them at home. Maureen, thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm very
thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
That is wonderful. So Maureen, let's start sharing your presentation to share your story. And to all of you watching us live, you can send your questions, your comments, your insights. And we're going to have Maureen sharing her story first, and you have Marianne's, and then you're going to do a Q&A. Maureen, the floor is yours.
Thank you. You can go to the next slide, please, Fabi. So as Fabiana explained, Sullivan was born in November of 1998 at Mount Sinai Hospital. He was quite small for his gestational age and spent a long time in the NICU there. And like many of you, our stay was a real roller coaster. I'd been admitted to the hospital for monitoring a couple of times, and at that point I was having ultrasounds and Doppler monitoring twice a day. And sadly, we lost his twin Griffin the day before they decided that we needed to take Sullivan via C-section. As you heard, I'd had several pregnancies. This was my first live birth. I'd experienced losses previously at 10 weeks, 28 weeks, and 20 weeks. So for the first 5 or 6 weeks, I was in a bit of a fog. I was grieving the loss of another baby, and I wasn't really believing there was much hope that Sullivan would survive. Next slide, please. At 3 weeks of age, Sullivan developed necrotizing enterocolitis, a bowel infection. He was then transferred to the hospital for sick children across the street, and we almost lost him at that point. Next slide, please. He had surgery to insert drains. He was pumped with antibiotics, and gradually his condition improved. After 3 weeks, he was well enough to move back to Mount Sinai just in time for Christmas. At that point, he was finally doing well, and he needed to grow. I'd been pumping all along, and I was determined to breastfeed. Next slide, please. He did at that point start some non-nutritive sucking. So this is already 2 months after his birth, but because of his illness, things were delayed. So at approximately 10 weeks, he started with some breastfeeding. And things were looking up. He was changed to CPAP and then to nasal prongs, and he even got moved to the level 2 nursery. We were attending all of the Tuesday night parent sessions with Marianne so we could soak up as much information as we could about how to take care of a preemie. But things started to change at around 11 weeks. Next slide, please. At this point, he weighed 1,400 grams. He developed a cough, then he started to have spells, and he was hard to keep oxygenated. He was moved back to level 3, and he was reintubated. He had a spinal tap to rule out meningitis. He had transfusions to try and improve his hemoglobin. And when the test determined it wasn't bacterial, the cause was then likely a virus. And this was the first time we learned about the possibility of an RSV infection. We'd never heard of RSV, and the name was even confusing. We didn't know what syncytial meant. We were entering a very scary week in Sullivan's short life. He was getting sicker and sicker, and finally we ended up in the hospital for 2 nights to be close in case anything happened. He was changed from the jet ventilator to an oscillating ventilator with nitric oxide. Eventually, since that wasn't enough, they took him off the ventilator and they actually used an ambu bag to manually inflate his lung. This is my absolute most vivid memory of the whole experience because the NICU fellow and other staff, they bagged him for 4 hours to keep him alive. His bed was surrounded for hours by a multitude of staff. The next night, we were offered a room attached to the NICU that was usually used for parents to spend time with their baby in a precarious state. We knew then there was a good chance Sullivan wasn't going to survive, but he did. We had amazing care by exceptional staff, and he slowly began to breathe on his own and require less and less ventilation support. He was in isolation for 2 weeks until he had 2 RSV tests. That makes me think so much of having to have 2 COVID negative tests. Sullivan's breathing improved gradually day by day. There was another child in isolation with him. They shared a room who was also RSV positive, but he ultimately didn't survive, and that was devastating. By 12 weeks, and this is just a week after this whole thing started, he was extubated and on low flow oxygen. He was moved to level 2 and into a cot, and there was no more peering through those tiny portholes. And luckily, once he recovered, his course was much smoother. We had steady growth, feeding. As parents, we were taking on more and more of his daily care. And finally, we got to stay in the care by parent room with him, and we were ready to take him home. Next slide, please. So after 124 days after this adventure began, he weighed 4 pounds, 7 ounces when we took him home. I think as parents of infants with prolonged NICU stays, we know our babies much better than parents taking home a full-term baby after one night in the hospital. So we weren't worried about the everyday care, but there were so many worries that were specific to preemies, mostly around the danger of infection. We knew from our education classes with Marianne we'd need to practice good hand washing, that we were our child's biggest advocate, so we needed to protect him from the outside world, and that included relatives. We were very clear with friends and family that they wouldn't be able to hold him or touch him for a while, that we were going to come home and have some time alone with him, and that the first visits would be to just look at him. We had an amazing pediatrician, Dr. Marty Perlmutter, who supported us, and he never made me feel like a paranoid mom. Next slide, please. He was the one that suggested getting the Rsv Prophylaxis for Sullivan, even though he was turning 1 in November when you usually start this. But he was very small. He weighed about 12 pounds on his first birthday on November 8th. So he was administered monthly injections for the winter months until March, I think it was. It was reassuring that he'd be protected from another bout with RSV. He had had so much damage to his lungs that he was susceptible to lots of infection. We came home in the month of March, so the weather was already improving enough that we could do lots of outdoor walks. No baby groups for us until he was older. And I ended up extending my mat leave. At that point in time, you got 6 months of mat leaves and 2 months you could have extended at no pay. But I didn't feel comfortable going back to work. He weighed 9 pounds when I was scheduled to go back to work. Next slide, please. Because his lungs were badly damaged with RSV and the mechanical ventilation, Sullivan was very prone to respiratory infections. He developed croup at 9 months old when we were on vacation in Scotland. And it's a bit scary having a sick baby when you're not at home. He was hospitalized twice with pneumonia, but you can see he's about 13 months here. He was a pretty happy patient. He had puffers over the years to help him breathe pretty much every time he got sick. And I'm sure we were a little panicky, but I remember we'd been taught by the respiratory therapists and the nurses and doctors that by the time he'd be 8 or 9, most of the lung tissue would have renewed itself and his lungs would have recovered. And sure enough, pretty much right on target once Sullivan reached that age. He had fewer colds, fewer chest infections, and he didn't require puffers anymore to assist in breathing when he did have a cold. I remember hearing recently that there was very little RSV last winter, and Marianne will talk more about that shortly, but clearly all the hand washing, the limited contact with anyone outside our families or bubbles, all the masking, all that contributed to keeping the fragile babies and really infants in general safe from RSV. I hope going forward, after having lived through COVID, that families will be much more accepting of safe hygiene practice and will understand when you tell them they need to wash their hands, they need to mask, and they might need to socially distance from your baby until it's safe for them to be held by anyone other than their parents. We now have a model that shows how much those small changes can have a positive effect on the health of this population. So don't be afraid to set up rules about your child's care. They're counting on you to do that for them. Next slide, my last one. And here's our grown man now. He's had to deal with a few other issues associated with his early birth, but overall, he's accepted all of that in stride and he's flourishing. He's a sensitive, funny, loyal, and passionate young man, and we're very proud of him. And thank you very much for listening.
Maureen, thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm sure many parents can relate with the first year going home and several readmissions. So great to have your story. We're gonna. I have some questions for you. Let's bring Marianne's presentation here now. Give me just 1 second, and then you can do the Q&A at the end. And for all of you watching us at home, please write your questions, your comments, that we are going to address them right after Marianne's presentation. Let me just manage all these presentations here. Here you go, Marianne.
Okay, great. Thank you, Fabiana. And Maureen, thank you for sharing your story. I sort of remember it very, very vividly. Next. Okay, so I will say that Sullivan's diagnosis of RSV bronchiolitis in the NICU was something I actually never forgot. It had a huge impact on me regarding what can happen with an RSV infection in real time. Later on in that year, interestingly, and it had really nothing to do with Sullivan in terms of the RSV program, but Mount Sinai started an RSV program. It was started in Ontario as well. And his experience and Maureen's experience with having a sick baby in the NICU actually helped for me to create an RSV program and how to run it. And I've never forgotten it, Maureen. I was also a parent resource nurse, as Fabiana told you, and one of the things I was involved in was family integrated care research, and that's where I met Fabiana and Gabriel. And then once Gabriel went home, Fabiana became a fabulous volunteer for all our parent programs at Mount Sinai, but she also got involved in the family integrated care research. I retired 4 years ago, and I guess, all my experiences led into my role at CPBF. Next. Family integrated care, very, very quickly. Maureen talked about the importance of it, but what it actually stands for is where parents are integral members of their infant's care team. And the research showed that we did through Mount Sinai, it was national and international research. It increased weight gain at discharge, decreased parent stress and anxiety, and there was exclusive breast milk at discharge. Next. So RSV, what is RSV? Maureen had never heard of it before. Sullivan became sick. It is the most common cold virus. It is more than a cold. For adults, for sure, it's a cold, but it can really, really become quite significant and serious for high-risk infants and children under 1 year, if not under 2 years of age. Causes bronchiolitis and pneumonia, can have lifelong complications. And I think one of the things Maureen talked about was readmission for Sullivan, and in some cases, death. Highest rate of hospitalization in Canada. All infants are vulnerable, and I'm going to tell you why as we go forward in this presentation. But the highest risk infants are infants less than 3 months of age. That's not correct, and it's corrected age for the preterm population. Infants born less than 36 weeks gestation, and a diagnosis of bronchopulmonary dysplasia, BPD. It's a form of chronic lung, and it is a result of extreme prematurity, prolonged oxygen, and ventilation. Some infants with specific congenital heart disease, and then there are special categories, and all the provinces in Canada and territories have decided what infants fall into that category. Next. So why is RSV so common? Well, the actual virus lives on hard surfaces for up to 7 hours. So let's say somebody's got a cold in your home. We don't know as adults whether it's RSV or not because we're not swabbed. You touch your cell phone, 5-6 hours again, you touch your cell phone again, and you've got the virus on your hands. The virus also sits on skin for half an hour, hence the importance of hand washing. Cloth. You're sick, you've got a little bit of a runny nose, you sneeze into your sleeve, right here, you bring your baby up, and your baby is faced with the RSV virus. Paper tissue, of course, blow our noses, into garbage can, then we wash our hands. Gloves, extremely important. I see a lot of people wearing gloves, but virus actually hangs around on gloves for 2 hours as well. So again, gloves come off and it's hand washing. Thank you. Next. Okay, so Maureen mentioned RSV prophylaxis. It is an injection that has 2 other names, Synagis and peluvizumab. It is an antibody, so it's passive protection. It's not a flu shot or immunization. It decreases the risk of hospitalization. This is extremely important. It does not decrease the risk of an RSV infection. So if babies are receiving these injections, they still could get an RSV cold. What we're trying to do is keep them out of hospital. These injections are only given to the highest risk infants. It is province dependent, and for sure, Sullivan was extremely high risk. It's given generally in the first winter only, and it is a monthly injection, and it depends on when the baby's born, whether it's 3 or 5 doses. There are no national guidelines. Each provincial Ministry of Health makes their own decision in terms of criteria, the start and the end of the season. This information is available on all provincial public health websites and CPBF. Thank you. Next one. So why are some infants at more high risk? Well, I used to use these slides with parents when I was actually providing information and education to them, because I do believe if parents understand why their babies are at risk, and they see pictures or have specific one-on-one education or a parent education program, it really helps to understand and how to protect their babies. So we have 2 slides here. The one to the left is an immature lung, that of an infant born less than 36 weeks gestation. And to the right is the full-term lung. All those white, fluffy things that you can see there, they are alveoli or air sacs, and that's where the exchange of gases take place. The earlier the baby, the less of these air sacs are available, hence the immature lung. Next slide, please. Next. The other one that puts babies at risk are the antibody levels. So protective antibody levels are passed from the mom through the placenta to the unborn baby. So a full-term baby receives their full protection of maternal antibodies. And you can see here on this graph that I have a green bar and it's circled, and that's the level or the amount of antibodies, protective antibodies that are transferred to full-term babies. If you go to the bar next door, that's the transfer of antibodies for infants that are born less than 36 weeks gestation, and you can see it's less than half that of a full-term baby. Then we go to 32 to 28 weeks, and then less than 28 weeks. So that extremely premature infant has very, very limited protective antibodies. Next, please. Okay, so what does all this mean? Well, all babies have maternal antibodies when they are born, some more than others. So here I've got a graph. At the bottom of the graph are the months of age. And then I got dotted lines, green dotted line there, and that's the full-term baby when the full-term baby goes home. 35-week infants are somewhere between the green dotted line and the orange. The orange are babies less than 32 weeks, and the blue less than 28 weeks gestation. And that's the level of antibodies that infants have. What happens is the maternal antibodies get absorbed, and the babies start to make their own. So even a full-term baby who's never been in the NICU, if you follow that green dotted line, you can see as they're being absorbed and they're making their own, they're much lower than what they were when the baby went home. Now look at the orange line and the blue dotted line. Those babies are extremely vulnerable. So babies between 1 month, 7 months of age, and even up to under a year. This graph only shows you up to 7 months of age. Thank you. Next one. Okay, so what do parents know about RSV? So Canadian Premature Baby Foundation and Prema Quebec wanted to know, and they ran a survey last year, 2020. CPBF also did a roundtable this year. The key message that there were significant gaps in the NICU parents' full understanding of the impact of RSV. And there was a wide range of experiences about how parents obtained or did not obtain RSV information when babies were in the hospital. Next. Okay, so the survey had 691 parents from right across Canada, the majority being discharged, and the majority were born between 2015 and 2020. Key message, over 77 to 85% of parents had never heard of RSV prior to their infant's NICU admission. What was really astounding was almost 50% had other children at home. And when you think that RSV is the most common cold virus, and every child under the age of 2 will have had at least one RSV infection, that was astounding to me. Next. Okay, so the key points of this survey, the majority of families, once they were in the NICU and received some information and went home, they understood that bronchitis or bronchiolitis and pneumonia were common with RSV. And it was the leading cause of hospitalization, but they did not fully understand the possible combinations or that it could be a major problem. 30 to 80%, of course, that depends on provinces as to how many did know or did not know, but 30 to 80% did not receive in-depth education. So we're not really sure what that means. Did they pick up a pamphlet? Did they see something on the notice board? And 17% received no information. Funnily enough, 80% felt their knowledge good to very good when they took their babies home. But it didn't play out once they had their babies at home. 57% had little confidence in knowing how to protect their baby. 70% continued to seek for more information after discharge. Next. So from the survey, these are the parents' suggestions, and they suggested that there should be an improvement of the consistency of information across the board, the entire year, not just in the winter months. And this education and focus on risk reduction should be for all families, not just those that qualify for RSV prophylaxis. There should be a range of materials. There should be maybe videos. There should be written parent education program. They also suggested that the community should receive some form of education. They didn't feel very well supported when they took their babies home. So, for example, maybe public health nurse or family doctors. This survey was done prior to COVID, and even then, they wished for more peer and mental health supports. I can't imagine what it must be like now. Next. So they wondered whether or not all this information couldn't go into a toolbox that would be reviewed with families and provided to them at transfer or discharge. Multiple language easy to read, lots of pictures. This should go to families, even the babies do not qualify for RSV prophylaxis. How to decrease the risk. How to communicate to family and friends. Maureen talked about this. It's extremely important. Why is this baby at high risk? To include the discharge summary. And on the discharge summary, the baby qualifies, the baby doesn't qualify for these injections. This is the clinic or the doctor's office they're going to go to. Resources. Parents wanted more resources. They had a hard time trying to find resources when they went home. They also want vaccine information. In that, even when I was working at Mount Sinai, parents had a lot of family members who had children, their own children that weren't vaccinated. And they also felt that the communication between hospital and home could be improved, and maybe also the RSV clinic. Next, please. So the roundtable happened this year. That was just CPPF that did this. They wanted to gain further understanding. 6 parents represented across Canada. 50% of these babies had not received RSV prophylaxis. There were RSV nurses, a neonatologist, Dr. Bosco Pace, and myself. Parents shared their experience to confirm the survey results. But what was so interesting, the feedback from the RSV nurses provided an understanding as to why these gaps exist. Next, please. So I'd like you to have a look at these photographs here. If you look at the top one, that's a room full of equipment, monitors, IV poles, ventilators. There isn't anybody in the healthcare that is going to be thinking about RSV. We have the nurse with that baby in the middle picture. She isn't thinking about RSV either. And then we have the mom doing skin to skin, and she's certainly not thinking about RSV. So we can see why this is a huge challenge in the unit. There's so many other things that are going on in an NICU that RSV doesn't necessarily play a big part. So these are the challenges they identified. The RSV nurses felt there's inconsistency of education. There's also the seasonality role of RSV nurses. Some of the hospitals only have an RSV nurse in the winter. Different roles in hospitals to who provides information, the nurse, the pharmacist, the doctor, and how about the postpartum floor? Many 35-weekers go to postpartum. I don't think the postpartum nurse is thinking about RSV as she's supporting the mother to breastfeed and trying to get the mom and baby home. There's also huge confusion regarding the lack of clarity around who qualifies, who does not qualify. They know that information only goes to families who qualify. And summer babies, what happens if you're a 30-weeker born in July? Or how about a 35-weeker? Or maybe even a 28-weeker that goes home in August? Overwhelmingly, they felt the nurses should be the person to provide the education. But they felt there was different level of knowledge, and in-servicing and support should be provided to nurses throughout the year. Also, parents are not necessarily available during the day, maybe nights and evenings, and then they have, if it's an RSV nurse, they aren't able to see the family. And a challenge finding resources. Thank you. Next one. So Maureen said last season there was absolutely no RSV. We know, and there was no flu either, and we know why. She went through that. But what happened, I think there was so much fear that families didn't follow up with their RSV prophylaxis. And that's extremely important. If your baby is getting monthly protective injections, it's extremely important to continue going monthly because those injections only protect for a month. There was also extremely poor follow-up for the routine vaccinations as well. Preterm babies, newborn babies can't get whooping cough. They'd be extremely ill. So what is an RSV season? So if the RSV season last winter was nothing, what normally happens in Canada? Next, please. Okay, so it's the Public Health Agency of Canada that monitor this. They chart weekly, and they chart from the beginning of September to the next September because they want to see what winter months look like. The different bars are different viruses. There's rhinovirus, adenovirus, but the yellow bar is RSV. Generally speaking, RSV starts to sort of show its face more in December, January, February. Of course, it depends on where you are in Canada. But the fear is, and Maureen mentioned, or actually Fabiana did, that RSV is going to come back with a vengeance. And in fact, they saw that in other countries, and Canada is now experiencing increase. Next. Okay, so as I said, they report from the beginning of September, 1 year, to the next September the following year. Look at those yellow bars. RSV is already coming back to Canada and is significantly high. Fabiana, can you go back again a slide for me, please? Okay, can you look to the beginning of that graph? You don't see any RSV, so you can understand that RSV is coming back, and we are extremely concerned about that. Next, please. Okay, so some of the RSV prophylaxis programs for those babies who qualify, Ontario is actually starting next week to give those protective injections. If you as a parent are not sure whether your baby qualifies or doesn't qualify, or you need more information, please speak to your baby's doctor. Next. All right, so going forward, RSV needs more airtime. COVID for sure needed all the education, all the extensive press, absolutely amazingly important. But RSV needs this education and press as well. Next. So what has been suggested are these areas for staff education and support. Reducing the risk. What is RSV? How is it transmitted? I'm not so sure that people actually know that the RSV virus sits on hard surfaces for up to 7 hours. Understanding the guidelines. Who qualifies, who does not, and that's different across Canada. Parents want up-to-date information on vaccinations, so nurses need to receive that support, or at least know where to get it to provide it to families. Flu shots. Every baby over 6 months of age, family members, grandparents, etc., should get a flu shot. We don't want these young babies to be getting sick with flu. Information needs to be provided all year, and we need to have resources as well. Next, please. So this is what parents asked us in the survey. This is what we need to know. Why is my baby at risk? Immature lungs, immature immune system. How is it spread? How can they reduce the risk? What's the difference between just a common cold, flu, RSV, and of course now COVID, because people are pretty anxious about that. What should they look out for? What should they do about it? Medications, when to call the doctor. And we're going to talk about this in a minute. You still need to have fun. Viruses make babies sick, but going outside is really important with your baby. It's being around sick people. It's a similar information that actually has been given with COVID. They're talking about it this weekend. Go outside and see people. Just make sure nobody's sick around the baby. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that now. Next. Okay, so CPPF, what are they doing? They're following this survey. Well, reviewing and updating resources and materials on the website. Multi-languages regarding RSV is going to be going up, and the eligibility criteria by province and territory. Once we know what is going to occur, then that will go up. They're going to create a toolkit and communicate this with hospitals and RSV clinics. And then, of course, we're going to continue to share the survey and the roundtable results. Next. Okay, so the survey is on the CanadianPreemies.org website, as well as Preemie Quebec. And Dr. Bosco Pace, Fabiana, and myself, we had a paper published on more in-depth knowledge regarding the survey. I only briefly have skimmed over the top. Next. Currently, CPBF has a common winter illness booklet, which momentarily is going to be updated and put on their website. Their webinars, their podcasts on common winter illnesses. The information letter for parents is there to hand to relatives and friends as to why their babies are such high risk. And that's being updated as well. Eligibility criteria, I told you about. Weekly Preemie Chats, live education sessions as in today, Friday. They have a real-time peer support group and, of course, the survey support. Next. Here it is. Common Respiratory Illnesses, the brand new booklet. The other one's been updated. There's more information there. And here's your sneak preview. You are the first to see this. Next. And there's an infographic. And although it's not the same photographs that slides that I've shown you on immature lung, you can see the immature lung there on the left-hand side, and you can see the full-term lung on the right-hand side. And then there's a slightly different graph in terms of antibody transfer. But I think it describes very clearly the limited amount of antibodies at early gestational age right up to term. And this will be an amazing piece of paper for parents to be able to share with family and friends, grandparents, etc. So everybody can understand why babies are at risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne and Maureen, for your lovely presentations. I'm so grateful, Marianne, that you help us to create this new booklet that we just show, and I'm hoping next week's going to be already up on our website. I share all the resources on the chat here, so families can see the eligibility criteria for RSV in different provinces and the territories in Canada, and we'll always be updating that page. So thank you, both of you. So Maureen, let's start with you, because Marianne talked a little bit about having fun with the baby coming home. And I think it is always hard for families to find a balance between having fun with the baby, leave the hospital worries behind, and still be cautious about RSV and obviously now COVID. So what is your advice for families for them to enjoy the baby now the babies are home?
Yeah, I think, well, a lot of it too, and maybe we were a bit selfish, but we'd had so many other people taking care of our baby. We were just thrilled to be just the three of us in our little family. So I didn't have a big problem saying no to people who wanted to visit. But so, we did a lot of outdoor things. We did things that we like to do, and he was small and easily portable. So, we'd go to museums and look at things. And if he slept, great. If he didn't, well, that's just the way babies roll. So, lots of walks in the park. I dressed him many times a day. He had lots of clothes. So, we just did a lot of the really ordinary things that you do. And I think we were lucky because it was March and leading into summer, so we could do a lot of outdoor things. He was breastfeeding, and he breastfed a lot, so I was kind of tied to him and tied to sort of being somewhere I could do that. It was sort of every hour and a half or 2 hours, it felt like, but it was really just sort of focusing on him and having him home and keeping him healthy, and still doing the things we like to do. Like, I remember we went to I forget the name of it now, but there's a Toronto architecture tour, and you can go visit all the different sites in the city. They're very portable at that age. So we just sort of did our usual activities, and he got to come along.
Oh, that is so great. Marianne, what is your advice for families? Because I had to be honest with you, when I was in the ICU with Gabriel, you really scared me. And you told me all the possibilities that Gabriel could get very sick because he was coming home on oxygen. And it was actually on Thanksgiving long weekend that Gabriel was getting ready to go home. So it was early fall, beginning of RSV season. Yes. And I was terrified. So I did not follow your advice on trying to balance. I actually locked myself in. So the pandemic wasn't very new to me, the lockdowns. But it does take a toll on the families, and especially on the families' mental health. So what is your advice on that?
Okay, so it's interesting because Maureen took Sullivan home in March and you took Gabriel home in October. I do think there's a difference between going home in the winter and going home in the summer or the spring. The problem with the winter is it's dark a lot earlier. So you were locked into your home a lot earlier. You go home and it's cold and it's damp. So I get that that is a bit more of a challenge. And yes, I did tell you all the things that could happen because he was extremely high risk. I'm not saying Sullivan wasn't, but I didn't know as much when Sullivan went home. Sullivan taught me a lot, Maureen. He really did. He was my poster boy for how I ran the RSV program at Mount Sinai and how I supported parents. But it's important to get outside. Absolutely 100%. And Maureen talked about that, they wanted to be parents to Sullivan and they just wanted to be a threesome. Well, there's nothing stopping the 3 of you or the 4 of you going out and walking around the block. Or if you as a mom or a dad or who's ever caring for the baby wants to get out and quickly run around the block yourself. And that is a bit of a challenge, leaving your baby at home for the first time. But sometimes it's a good idea for moms just to get out and walk up and down the block maybe and come back in again. It's important to get out, important to hug your baby, important to kiss your baby. I'd probably stay away from the lips. It's important to do skin to skin. It's important to sing and dance and play, do all those kinds of things that will make it a little easier. With COVID, you're going to have more challenges getting out. So the biggest thing is getting out. Now, if there are other children in the home and the other child is in daycare or kindergarten, you're going to have a little more alcohol, hand sanitizer floating around. You're going to be a little bit more cognizant of hand washing. And if the sibling has a cold or runny nose, if it absolutely has to, is kiss the foot of the baby, and that's it, because you could have a challenge if it's a 3-year-old and come along and poke the baby's eye out. You never know. So it's really, really important to be able to this is more than a 3-minute answer or a 1-minute answer, but you have to involve the sibling, get the diaper or do this, but always hand wash before you touch the baby. Even if you walked away for 10 minutes and you come back, you could have picked up a cup that your child could have held. So wash your hands before you touch your baby, but lots of hugging and kissing.
So I think one good thing that came out of COVID is that everybody learned how to wash hands properly.
Yes,
because I remember having lessons at Sinai how to properly wash the hands and use hand sanitizer. And I should have bought shares for hand sanitizer because I have so much in the house for the first year. But let's say hello to our live audience here. Have Yasin from Bangladesh. Thank you so much for joining us here today. And Sabrina from Winnipeg. Hi, Sabrina. Thank you for joining us. And we have a comment here from Sarah. Let me find here. Sarah's baby was born in Barrie. I think I recollect from a 30-week baby. So they are currently building our case for Lachlan to qualify for Rsv Prophylaxis. It's said that the guidelines are so strict for our preemies. Marianne, let's comment on that, because you always said Ontario is one of the most generous provinces, but it's still the cutoff age is very low. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us. And Sarah is going to be our guest on November 12th, sharing her story.
Okay. Well, Sarah, you're from Ontario. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Barrie.
So the babies have to be 6 months of age or younger. And that is, if your baby was born before May the 1st of any year, they will not qualify unless there's a medical indication. And the medical indication really, really depends on what happened in the NICU. And I really can't talk about that because it's different. So I understand, there is a comfort, Maureen, isn't there, and Fabiana, for your babies to be protected by these injections.
Yeah.
But
I was just going to say, we really had our pediatrician on our side, and he's the one that advocated for Sullivan, because he was a year old already when RSV season started and when he was to start the prophylaxis. So if you can somehow get your pediatrician on board with you to advocate.
Well, no, I will tell you, I'm going to, Maureen, that was the case a long time ago. On the other hand, Sullivan was underweight and there were a few other things that were going on. It's almost impossible to get protection nowadays unless there's a huge medical indication and how immature the lungs are. And so for Sarah, I understand your fear. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. But what I'm going to say to you is it's hand washing It's staying away from sick people. And if there are other children in the home, the things that I've said, because I really, really believe, I don't want people to think that that injection is the be all and end all, because it isn't. And so it's the risk reduction things that we've been told about COVID that are going to make a big difference to the baby.
Absolutely. I was fortunate because Gabriel was actually on home oxygen, so he did qualify for 2 winters because of that. But Marianne, some parents have asked us in the past, if the baby qualified 1 winter and does not qualify in the 2nd winter, can they pay for the injections out of pocket?
I don't believe so. No, I don't believe so.
And it's not recommended.
No, it's not recommended. It truly, truly isn't recommended, because it's really all about decreasing the risk of a baby getting a cold. And that should be done regardless. It's decreasing the risk of every single infection, diarrhea, every single infection that could put a baby into hospital. So it's the risk reduction things that you're doing, with mixing it a little bit with having some fun and getting out, and if there are other children in the home. So no, I don't believe you can.
Okay, so Marianne, while we're talking about parents wanting a 2nd season, some parents are hesitant to get the injections. So, and we had a question this morning for a nurse. How can she talk to parents about that?
That's funny. I was talking to Maureen about this, because you mentioned that before. You know, there's so much information that parents receive when their babies are in the NICU. And Maureen will also talk to you. Were stunned, you were exhausted, you were this, and it's really hard to get information to families for them to explain. I think one of the biggest things is small amount of information, follow up with the information. Do not provide education information in the hallway as the parent's coming in to see their baby, or as the parent is leaving to run and maybe pick a child up from daycare. It's about sitting down with them, eye contact, asking what their concerns are, and what this injection is made of. It is an antibody. And remember, I was talking about maternal antibodies being transferred, and I was talking about how they get absorbed and the babies start to make their own antibodies. So it is an antibody. And I think if parents can be given the time, be given written information, have it reviewed, and maybe even talk to the doctor. Sometimes I always felt that I wouldn't say I knew more, but because I knew so much about RSV and I spoke to so many families, the doctors really, that's only one thing in their wheelhouse, so to speak. But if parents need to speak to a doctor, then fair enough, do that. So it's really about small information, time, following up, and not rushing. I think I would actually, what I used to do is give the information to the parents first so they could read it. And then I'd say I was going to come back to talk about it. Because if you actually come up to a parent and say, hey, this is me, my name's Marianne, I want to talk to you about RSV, here's this information, but this is an injection, they're not going to be able to cope with that information. So I used to leave the information with the parent, for the parent, if I saw them, or the bedside nurse would give it to the parent. And then I would come back. In some cases, I could come back 3, 4, and 5 times to talk to the family, because they might have had one more question. And it's really important to give them time.
Right.
I don't know, Maureen.
Wait, what is your perspective on that, Maureen?
I think you're right that, little bits of information, because you're so overwhelmed with being in the NICU and you're learning about so many different parts of your baby's care. But I really found in your presentation the image of the immature versus full-term lungs, that's really powerful. I think visuals help a lot, and showing the levels of antibodies. I think that would be really helpful to sort of have those on hand to be able to show parents, this is what we mean when we say the lung is immature. Because it's not really meaningful unless you can place that somewhere. So having the graphics might help, just to have them on hand to be able to let parents visualize that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think something that they can actually look at, take home, and think about.
Yes, but I'm a firm believer that we should ask parents questions. Why are they afraid of? Because then you understand where they're coming from,
right,
in that situation. So I just want to add a comment here from Sarah, because Sarah said it's awful how paranoid we become from our experiences. And I have to say that is very true, because every time Gabriel coughs, now I'm better, he's 9 years old, but every time he coughed for the first 3-4 years, my heart starts race, because there's so many readmissions to pediatric hospitals, bronchiolitis, pneumonia. Gabriel coded. We are like you, Maureen. Gabriel also got sick when you were traveling, and he was admitted in a hospital out of Canada. So yes, we carry that fear, that trauma from that ICU. And for me, it took a few years to relax. And now people say, "Oh, aren't you afraid of sending Gabriel to school during the pandemic?" I relaxed. We take all the precautions, but I'm happy he's in school. So I learned how to have that balance and enjoy the time being without being paranoid all the time. But it took me years to let that fear go.
And I think it's hard too, because, your friends and family who have full-term babies, and everybody tells them how to, take care of their children and keep them safe from infection. So they think you're kind of overdoing it. And it's very hard to get people to understand if they haven't lived through it. It's not the same thing, that our children are more vulnerable, and we do have to take extra precautions. So I think that's kind of hard, because you're almost made to feel like you're paranoid for worrying about these things. But in the long run, you're the only one that can take care of it for your child. So, I had to let go of what other people thought of me. And if I'm a paranoid mom, I'm a paranoid mom. That's just the way it was.
We carry it proudly.
Yeah, exactly. And, Sullivan got to grow out of his bronchial issues, and I got to grow out of my paranoia. Almost. I'm still a little paranoid.
And just to add one comment here, because I think it's even harder for people to understand than ICU right now, because they cannot, like the extended family or the in-laws, the grandparents cannot even go there to see and to live for a couple of hours a day or a couple of hours a week that experience. Right. Or like the families are pretty much alone in the hospital, because when I was in the ICU for 5 months, some of people close to us went to see Gabriel. So they had an idea how tiny the babies are, the alarms and the beeps and the machines. But right now, like families are alone, or the parent is alone in the ICU. So I think it's even harder for them to explain it. So I'm very grateful that Marianne is actually reviewing a letter that we have for parents to give to extended families to say, okay, our baby is fragile because of this reason. So that is more like a medical letter to give to the families, instead of us trying to, hurt family members' feelings and say, don't come visit if you are sick. But anyway, Marianne, quickly, one last message for parents and healthcare professionals watching us here today.
One last message. Well, I'm going to go back on what Maureen said. I think it's important. People generally have difficulty telling other people no. And I think one of the things is that you are the baby's parents. You are the ones that are advocating for your baby, and you are the ones that really need to say, I'm not comfortable with this, and this is why. And just let go of worrying that you're neurotic or you're not neurotic. It has to be balanced a little bit with your own mental health. So if there is a grandmother or there is an aunt or an uncle, and, it'd really be helpful if they come in, then, and Fabiana mentioned, we all know about hand washing and masks and everything, is to get them to wash their hands, maybe even change their top when they come in. Change their top, wash their hands, and then maybe help you. So I think there are things, I think you need, as parents, you need to balance it all out. But you're the parents, you've gone through hell. And God bless you with your fabulous babies at home. Just kiss them and love them and skin to skin them.
Absolutely. Maureen, your last message.
I think that's great advice, Marianne. I knew somebody who actually had a sign up at the front door, about the rules for entering the house and washing your hands. covering your mouth. Don't come in if you're sick. So it's the same rules we're seeing for COVID. So I don't think people are going to be offended if you bring up these rules for your infant and explaining why you're being so stringent. But yeah, enjoy your babies. The good thing is they can get through an illness like this with the right care, and you can manage help manage it for them in the community and at home. So and they can end up very healthy in the long run. Absolutely. Even with a lot of respiratory issues when they're babies. So yeah, enjoy your babies, keep them safe, and keep yourselves safe.
Absolutely.
I'm going to say one more thing, Maureen, because you brought that up. You may want to consider buying something that's a little circle that you can pin on your car seat or your stroller. Please don't touch my hands. That's because right. Parents created those things when I worked at Mount Sinai. And please don't touch my hands, or please don't touch me, or...
Yeah. We actually have a printable on our website. Families can just go download and laminate and put on the car seat or on the stroller.
Perfect.
Good news.
Perfect. So thank you, Marianne, for always sharing your knowledge, your experience with us. I'm so grateful that you are in my life when I was in the ICU, and I learned so much from you, as you know, and having you at CPBF today is so wonderful. And Maureen, thank you for joining us here today to share your experience. I love hearing parents' stories because we all learn from one another, sharing our stories, being vulnerable, but we always do that to support other families. So I'm very grateful to you for taking the time to be here with us today.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
I guess you said happy Thanksgiving. So happy Thanksgiving, everyone in Canada. And for all of you watching us live on YouTube or Facebook, thank you so much for joining us here today. The video of today's session and all the videos from our live series are right here on our website, canadianpreemies.org. If you miss anyone, you have a full library of content for you. And I want to thank our sponsors, AstraZeneca and Water Wipes, for their ongoing support to our education sessions. And we are a charitable organization, and we believe that through education and support, we can empower families, ensuring they are ready to take care of their babies. Visit our website, consider making a donation. Together, we can create a brighter future for all families. See you again next Friday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Stay well, everyone.